Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, the second part thereof for the 8th of September 2025. I've done a couple of other added videos today, one on Trump and some claims of compromat from an ex-KGB agent, and I've done an explainer on Angela Rayner, the former Deputy Prime Minister of the UK, resigning. Explained what was going on there. And now we're going to talk about our general sort of geopolitical topics concerning Ukraine. And we're going to start with US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent saying we are prepared to increase pressure on Russia, but we need our partners in Europe to follow us. So this is a follow-on from yesterday, where Trump was asked whether he was ready to enter phase 2 in putting sanctions on Russia. And he said very quickly, yes, I am. And this is seen as being a bit of a change in direction. And then you had Scott Bessent and Howard Lutnick backing that up. So it looks like the US, at least according to some of their rhetoric, but of course only ever as good as the last 5 minutes, appear to be pivoting towards putting extra pressure on Russia. He says, Bessent, we are in a race now between how long can the Ukrainian military hold up versus how long can the Russian economy hold up. Absolutely correct. And if the US and the EU can come in with more sanctions, more secondary tariffs on the countries that buy Russian oil, the Russian economy will be in full collapse. And that will bring President Putin to the table, he said. You've also got this from the Kyiv Independent reporting that the US is urging Europe to stop buying Russian oil and gas in exchange for tougher Moscow sanctions. So the US will put tougher sanctions on if the Europeans are heftier with their sanctions. But I don't appreciate Scott Bessent's claims to some degree here, where he says, how we need our partners in Europe to follow us, as if they're leading on sanctions. And they're not. They put 50% sanctions on India, and that's it. They have been putting sanctions on, but not anything past really January the 20th this year. So Trump came in and sanctions are kind of stopped. There have even been claims that they have stopped enforcing many of the previously existing sanctions. Europe is just putting its 19th package of sanctions on. So actually, if I was Europe, I'd be tremendously peed off with how Scott Bessent is framing this. Because we're hearing today that the EU is preparing a new package of sanctions against Russia, targeting banks and the oil trade, and some measures to be coordinated with the US. An EU delegation will travel to Washington for talks. The Kremlin responded that, quote, no sanctions can force Russia to change its consistent position. But, Europe has been constantly sanctioning, closing loopholes, re-sanctioning, doing this, doing that. 18 packages and now a 19th. So I don't think Europe needs any lectures from the US. What the US really wants Europe to do is put secondary sanctions on. But what the EU wants the US to do is just do what the EU has been doing for the last 7-8 months without the US following on. So it's kind of frustrating. European Union plans to include up to 50 Russian banks and energy companies in its new sanctions package, says Visioner. Brussels is also very likely to target Russia's tax and credit card systems, cryptocurrency exchanges, and impose additional restrictions on oil trade. The EU is considering tightening sanctions against major Russian oil corporations, banning the export of a large volume of chemicals used by Moscow's military industry, and sanctioning intermediary companies through which these materials are supplied to Russia. Now, that's all good news from a European point of view. Bad news that, and we'd heard this previously, but Belgium, this is from September the 6th, actually, Belgium Foreign Minister Maxime Prévost reiterated that confiscating frozen Russian sovereign assets to aid Ukraine, as in taking the original assets and kind of giving those to Ukraine, quote, is not an option for Belgium. Now, remember, Belgium through Euroclear has at least $200 billion worth of frozen Russian assets. He warned it would undermine trust in the euro and damage the credibility of European financial services. Most of the 200 billion euros in frozen Russian funds are held in Belgium's Euroclear. So there you go. Sir William Browder, Bill Browder, who is a big critic of Putin, says this is nonsense. The guy's just a coward. He could care less, or he couldn't care less about trust in the euro, which will be absolutely fine after confiscating Russian frozen assets. yes, I can actually build up a case, like I've said to you many times, for both holding the assets and skimming off the profits and using them to more sustainably give Ukraine money, but I can also build a case for giving them everything now and they just get a massive whack of funding now, but then that's the end of it. You can build up a case for both. There are some pros and cons there. Right, Chancellor Merz has come out and said exactly what needs to be said, which is everything indicates that Putin's imperialist plan would not end with the conquest of Ukraine, but would only begin with it. And the fact that Ukraine is also defending our freedom in Europe, that we are defending it together with Ukraine, is not just political bluster. So he's tying the support aid for Ukraine in with real tangible security needs of Europe as a whole. So he says it is a fact from which we must and already have drawn consequences. To support Ukraine in its struggle for peace in Europe is to stand by its side, and this may last for a very long time. So European security demands that we support Ukraine, and just letting you know, it could well last for a very long time. You keep saying that Putin's a bad guy, that Putin's not really ready for peace, and I think he is doing a pretty good job of priming his audience, the electorate, German people, but also Europeans, that, you know, potentially this is going to go on for the long haul. Trump may have delusions of grandeur, delusions of being able to finish it within 24 hours. Obviously, that's not going to happen now, but the reality is it's going to be more challenging than that. Whereas Trump is although you're starting to hear, well, this is more difficult than I thought, but he still keeps on with very much positive views about wrapping it up, although, you know, his rhetoric has certainly changed. But there's much more of a realistic, I think, evaluation of what's going on from European leaders, particularly Merz at the moment. Shashank Joshi, quoting from the Financial Times here, actually saying, if you look back 9 months ago, everybody was really afraid, especially about our relations with the United States. Who's he talking about? Well, Antonio Costa, who's the president of the EU Council, saying, you know, we were really scared that it was all going to go wrong with the US. Quote, over the last 9 months, we managed to stabilize the transatlantic relations. So Trump comes along, oh my goodness, loads of worrying things that Trump has said, but we've managed to stabilize it. The Europeans certainly have stabilized, I think, the relationship with the US, although there's still economic challenges, and certainly tech is a big issue there. But Ukraine, there is at least some agreement going on, but it is a case of stabilizing it. I don't think we've seen the US really jump on board particularly. I think these are huge challenges for the EU going forward, because the Trump administration is simply more aligned to Russia than we would ever want them to be. Now, someone who is aligned to Ukraine but caught somewhat in the middle, like he was part of the America First political group, wasn't he? So, you know, Keith Kellogg, as a military man, came from a sort of MAGA political positioning anyway. So he's never going to be like super uber, like moderate kind of politically. But I guess that because he's a military man and he properly understands Ukraine, or at least he understands it a hell of a lot more than Trump and his administration, which is why I think he's been sidelined, because he's too pro-Ukraine. His daughter works out there. She's in Kyiv. He's kind of caught in this place where he can't go too full on in support for Ukraine, because he doesn't want to bite the hand that feeds him. And that hand that feeds him is the MAGA hand, pretty much. It's the Trump administration. And he's also part of that America First sort of information space, if you like. Russia's mass attack shows Kremlin is not interested in ending war diplomatically, Trump's envoy to Ukraine has said. Quote, and words are important. This tells you everything I think you need to know about Keith Kellogg. And I'm going to compare what he said, even though it's broadly, I agree with it, like technically, but it's not strong enough. And it's not strong enough because this is the US speaking, and he's compromised. I mean, I don't mean compromised in a kind of like compromised by Russia, but he's compromised by his MAGA positioning and needing to keep on the right side of Trump whilst staying strong for Ukraine. So it says, quote, this is to do with the 810 Shahed drone attack on Kyiv and Ukraine the other night, record-breaking attack. He said the attack was not a signal that Russia wants to diplomatically end this war. Which is a very cumbersome way of saying Russia doesn't want to end the war. But he said it's not a signal that they do want to end the war. This is the difference may seem pretty kind of, I guess, you might not think it's that important, but for me, I think words are important. And he's really not saying Russia doesn't want to do peace and then putting the blame on Russia. It's just like certainly not showing that they do. Now, compare that kind of rhetoric to, and this is where it came from in a larger excerpt. A danger in any war is escalation. Russia appears to be escalating with the largest attack of the war, hitting officers of the Ukrainian cabinet in Kiev. I was there with their Prime Minister Syridenko 2 weeks ago in that building. History shows events can escalate out of control through actions as these. It is why President Trump is working to stop this war. The attack was not a signal that Russia wants to diplomatically end this war. What he's not doing there is attacking Russia. He's just saying it appears to be escalating. I mean, come on. It appears like it's freaking escalation. It's 810 shahids in one night. And it's not a signal that they do want to end the war. Right, now this is Mark Carney. Just a random comparison. Mark Carney, and just think about the language. Russia brutally attacked Ukraine last night, killing innocent civilians in residential areas and damaging the Cabinet of Ministers building. My thoughts are with the injured and everyone who is mourning their loved ones. A just and lasting peace for Ukraine will require robust and credible security guarantees. Last night's cowardly attack underscores the urgency of that mission. I was honoured to stand with President Zelensky in Kiev late last month as Ukraine marked its Independence Day. As I affirmed alongside Prime Minister Syridenko in the same building that was damaged last night, Canada stands with Ukraine, and Putin's unrelenting aggression will never weaken our resolve. Canada is steadfast in its commitment to the coalition of the willing and its willingness to deploy direct and scalable military assistance in support of upholding a ceasefire and lasting peace. That is chalk and cheese. So as much as we might like Keith Kellogg, and in as much as he, out of the whole of the administration, is one of the more pro-Ukrainian members, it is simply a tale of two rhetorics here. Like, what can I say that is about as weak source as you can get in tackling Russia? Not even attacking Russia, tackling Russia. Russia appears to be escalating, not a signal that they want peace. And Mark Carney just goes for the jugular. Brutally attacked. Cowardly attack. Canada steadfast in its commitment. Ceasefire, lasting peace, just and lasting peace. Credible security guarantees. Putin's unrelenting aggression will never weaken our resolve. It's just really, really chalk and cheese. And that's what's frustrating about the United States, is they sit there in the middle trying to negotiate and mediate, but not taking a moral position. And I think that's egregious. It's like, we saw, again, Godwin's law and whatnot. But if we go to Nazi Germany and just look at all the disgusting things that happened there and just say, well, I'm not really going to criticize Hitler. I'm just going to sit here and be as neutral as possible. Well, actually, that tells me that you are morally deficient. If you're refusing to morally condemn something as egregious as that, then you are morally deficient yourself. And I would say the same here to Trump. If you are, and his people, if you are not willing to say the obvious here, then you're compromising your own moral judgment in the name of, neutrality or in the name of trying to make money out of a trade deal with Russia. Now, Putin is, quote, and again, let's talk about language now. Trump is, quote, not thrilled with Russia's mass attack and will speak with Putin very soon. Very soon, over the next couple of days, look, we're going to get it done. The Russia-Ukraine situation, we're going to get it done. Again, this goes back to the difference between Merz and Trump. So even though Trump has been saying, well, it's more difficult than I thought, or it may happen, it may not, blah, 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 he still defaults to very soon, over the next couple of days, look, we're going to get it done. So we're going to get this done over the next couple of days. The Russia-Ukraine situation. We're going to wrap it up in the next couple of days. No, you're not. So the difference between Like Negs and Trump is very explicit there. And the difference between Kellogg and Carney is very obvious as well. Now, Trump said he will speak to Putin soon over the next couple of days, as we heard. And this comes after the Russian massive assault with over 800 drones killed 3 people in Kiev, including a 2-month-old infant. Trump expressed frustration with the escalation, saying, "I'm not thrilled with what's happening there, and I'm not happy with anything having to do with the war." So he's just not happy. He also believes that this administration would manage to settle the conflict, his administration. So still believing he can do it, but I'm just not happy. It's just this almost childlike language. I'm not happy. Like, oh, you can do better than that, mate, honestly. And then he says stuff like this, which is just patent nonsense.
Russia had a pretty big attack on Ukraine over the weekend. All about it. You have always said how good your relationship is with President Putin, but he's not really giving you anything that you want. Is that making you less trustful of him?
Well, nobody was tougher in Russia than me. That has to do with the pipeline, as you know, Nord Stream 2 and lots of other things. But I'm not happy. The greatest obstacle.
So, like, nobody was tougher on Russia than me is just simply not true. Like, literally, the UK has been tougher than you. Literally, Germany's been tougher than you. Literally, the Baltics and the Nordic states have been tougher than you. The EU has been tougher than you. Like, you're just lying. You're just lying. And then he's sort of deferring to Nord Stream 2 and lots of other things, but I'm not happy. You know, certain European leaders are coming over to our country on Monday or Tuesday. I think we're going to get that settled. Just vagueness and, hey, I'm amazing. Yeah. So anyway, no, Trump is not hard on Russia, just empirically so. Now, I'm just going to take a sidebar from just a couple of tabs here because we've got Trump getting interviewed or questions getting asked at him at press gaggles and whatnot. Here's a fascinating one that was asked of him, I think maybe on the way to the US Open. Yes, that's what it says.
Darling, that's fake news.
Well, why would the Department of Defense?
Listen, be quiet. Listen. You don't listen. You never listen. That's why you're second rate. We're not going to war. We're going to clean up our cities. We're going to clean them up so they don't kill 5 people every weekend. That's not war. That's common sense.
Okay, I just have to take issue with this. It's just incredibly bloody rude. Right, so he released... And I did a video on this. He released a Truth Social post saying, essentially, we're going to war with Chicago. You know, let's go and just find that. Trump, Chicago, war. Right? You'll find this. And this is what he released. There it is. I love the smell of deportations in the morning. Chicago, about to find out why it's called the Department of War. Right? So I think it's a fairly justified question to say... are you ready to go to war with Chicago? And he says, when you say that, darling, that's fake news. Listen, be quiet. Listen, you don't listen. That's why you're second rate. We're not going to war. So patronising. I wonder why he's so patronising. Oh, he's speaking to a reporter who's a woman and a woman of colour. Be quiet. That's why you're second rate. Trump lashed out the former National Association of Black Journalists, Journalist of the Year, for accurately asking him about his very real, not at all fake news threat of war directed at Chicago. Maybe he doesn't realise what's being posted on his behalf on Truth Social. Maybe that explains it. But I'm sorry, that is completely unacceptable for Trump to behave like that. He is so freaking unprofessional. And then when we have JD Vance, you know, saying... this is something else I wanted to add on to the other day that I forgot, actually, and it's really, really important. So I did the whole thing about the Venezuelan boat being blown up, 11 people on board, and they were killed and it being illegal and a war crime. And then JD Vance said, don't really give an S whether you think it's a war crime. And then he had Marco Rubio as well, sort of coming out and justifying it. And you had Rand Paul of Republicans saying that this is a despicable and thoughtless sentiment and to glorify and kill people without trial, which is absolutely correct from Republican Rand Paul. taking his own vice president to task on this matter. And then this point is so important. So Amy McGrath, who's a veteran, says, folks ask me why firing all the top military lawyers was such a bad thing. So I forgot to mention that Pete Hegseth went into the Department of Defense, now Department of War, when he was made Secretary of Defense, War, and he immediately got rid of all the JAGs. So these are the military lawyers. And I said at the time, the only reason you purge military lawyers is if you want to do something that's illegal, right? You're just lining up to do something illegal. So then they go and do illegal things, and there are no lawyers around to say, hey, that's illegal. You can't do that. You've purged the DOD or the DOW of that. So folks ask me why firing all the top military lawyers was such a bad thing. My warning was that it may lead to ordering the military to do unethical things. That is happening. Executions of civilians in international waters, active duty troops in our cities. There will be more. So it's unconstitutional to have troops in the cities, and it's illegal to blow up Venezuelans on a boat in the middle of the sea. Just crazy times. Absolutely crazy times. And then I talked to you as well about Tom Hanks being his award from West Point, the military academy, being the award ceremony being cancelled, because even though he does amazing things for veterans and he's a massive veterans advocate, he's acted in loads of films and sort of informing people on issues of war and whatnot, but he's a historian now, Tom Hanks, as well as, you know, advocating for veterans. So he's going to get an award, and then that was cancelled. And then actually subsequent to me announcing that that's cancelled, Trump has said this: our great West Point, getting greater all the time, has smartly cancelled the award ceremony for actor Tom Hanks. Important move. We don't need destructive woke recipients getting our cherished American awards. Hopefully the Academy Awards and other fake awards shows will review their standards and practices in the name of fairness and justice. Watch their dead ratings surge. He is just becoming a dictator. Like, everything he does is removing the choice of other agencies and people to do things and want things and say things, and he's just like, I want that to stop, I want that to stop. And last night, the US Open, he was booed when the national anthem came on and it showed him on the screen. He was booed by the centre court there, and it might have been the US Open organisers, but it might have come from the top itself. But either or, it's a form of censorship. You know, TV shows were apparently not allowed to show him getting booed, so you had to see recordings from inside the arena, inside the court complex, to hear him getting booed. It's just absolutely ridiculous. Anyway, back to Russia and Ukraine. So Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, the US is beginning to hear Russia about the root causes of the conflict in Ukraine, including the issue of the extermination of everything Russian. Russia sees prospects in economic cooperation with the US, for example, in the production of liquefied natural gas, including in Alaska. So we have Lavrov really buttering up Trump here and saying, you know, yeah, we can work closely with the US. They're starting to understand that we need to get rid of these root causes of the war. Lavrov is making thinly veiled threats, so more generally at the West, quote, they messed with the wrong people. And what amazes me is that the West still can't draw any lessons from centuries of history in the context of repeated attempts to restrain, subdue, and punish Russia. So on the one hand, saying, oh, the US, you know, and actually feeding the US with these kind of NATO expansionists, where NATO is the West, is Europe now, and Canada, and, you know, other allied nations. That's the West, and the US is actually, oh no, you guys are actually can be close to, you're starting to understand us now in Russia. So starting to peel the US away from Europe. And this is one of the intentions, I think, of the Russians over the last however long, and they are succeeding. Their information warfare is succeeding in doing that very well. Thank you very much. Now, the press secretary of the Russian war criminal of Putin, Dmitry Peskov, has said no sanctions will be able to force Russia to change its consistent position. So they're denying sanctions will have any effect. And then Helsinki is on a course. So this is Finland. So the Russians are now taking a pop at Finland. And you can see, I think, Anton Gerashenko has a whole thread on this, but I'm just going to tell you only this part. This is Medvedev, the former premier of Russia, expressing his opinion in a column, New Finnish Doctrine, Stupidity, Lies, Ingratitude, published by TASS, one of the state media entities. It says Helsinki is on a course for preparation for war and is probably preparing a springboard for an attack on Russia, starting to prime maybe the Russian population that Finland's getting ready to attack Russia. And a very dangerous, I think, piece that he's published there. Now, Zelensky, on the other hand, is starting to be quite a bit more open in his views on what was and wasn't achieved in Alaska and what's going on at the moment, and how he's getting frustrated with a lack of I think, resilience, really, political resilience from the United States and from Trump. He said Alaska summit with Trump, quote, gave Putin what he wanted. Wow. So Putin doesn't want to meet with me, but he wants very much to meet with the President of the United States to show everybody video and images that he is there, President Zelensky said in an interview with ABC News. So that ABC News interview had quite a lot in it. So here's a few pointers from Max 25. So Zelensky is ready to meet with Putin anywhere except Moscow. So that's one thing that Zelensky apparently said. The meeting with Trump gave Putin what he wanted. It is a pity that Ukraine was not represented in Alaska. So again, it's starting to be fairly honest about, as you would expect and hope. But in light of, I wonder whether this will annoy the Americans, but it's absolutely on point. Like, it was a pity that Ukraine wasn't represented there because Trump gave Putin exactly what he wanted. To end the war, we need to increase pressure on Putin. There is only one way to stop a killer, to deprive him of his weapons. And Putin's weapon is energy. So that's interesting. So you know that hydrocarbons is in the crosshairs for the Ukrainians and will continue to be. I think Trump wants to end this war, but if we are talking about a fair and lasting peace, it is important not only to end it. So this is another brutally honest bit about Trump saying, look, you want to end the war, but you want a quick end to the war. And a quick end to the war is not a good end to the war. We want a just and lasting end to the war. And you don't get a just and lasting end to the war if you want to end it in 24 days. Quickly, now, next week. Trump was talking about that again. We're going to get these guys together. We're going to sort this out next week. It's going to happen. Yeah. No, you want to do this carefully and properly so you have a just, so it's fair and it's lasting. There's justice in how you end the war. Not a quick end to the war, which will be to the benefit of the Russians. Now, Russia has counted on China to replace the West. Now, trade is collapsing, apparently, according to Euromaidan Press, down nearly 18% in August. So even Kremlin officials complain Beijing, quote, does not behave like an ally. Sanctions pressure works and Putin's economic lifeline is fraying. So there are claims that actually, although, China and India are still, to some large degree, helping out Russia, actually, they may be reacting somewhat to sanctions and secondary sanctions and pressure from the West. Russian imports from China plummeted 17.8% in August compared to last year. Chinese custom data shows marking the steepest monthly decline since Moscow began relying on Beijing for its economic lifeline after invading Ukraine. The collapsing trade that once sustained Putin's war economy has prompted frustrated Russian officials to tell Reuters that China does not behave like an ally and sometimes engages in outright robbery. Of course, China don't really care about Russia, and they'll just be using Russia to get everything they can. Cheap hydrocarbons, sell some of their crappier cars and stuff to Russia. There's a lot of tech now going into Russia. They've essentially repackaged Chinese cars as Russian cars quite often. So Russia is getting taken advantage of by China, left, right, and centre. But there is a decline here of Chinese goods into Russia. Now, I don't know exactly why. I mean, sanctions pressure and market saturation take a toll. So market saturation could be a point. So there's lots of stuff going into China, maybe into Russia, maybe a lot of Chinese stuff. There can't be too much more, and they've had their fill, and so you're going to see it naturally come down. You probably don't have a lot of spending money if you've got inflation going up in Russia, and you've got all sorts of economic pressures there. So welfare is not great, and so I don't know how flush people are with money, but I doubt particularly hugely. And so all these things might have an effect on Russia-China trade. But as you can see from this graph, it's going back down now. So good news, probably for those supporting Ukraine. Now, going over to Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, quote, he's been saying things again. We don't want to cast the Ukrainians into nothingness. We're not anti-Ukrainian. We want a future and perspective for Ukraine because a collapsing Ukraine on our eastern border would pose a tremendous danger. But this cannot mean membership of the EU because that would mean war. I presume he means the EU and not NATO, but he won't be a fan of Ukraine joining either. Slovakia have been much more inclined to allow Ukraine to join the EU. They seem to be in favour of that. Hungary are still being very difficult. Viktor Orban made a cynical statement claiming Ukraine's future is a division into three parts: a Russian zone, a Western zone, and a buffer in between. Magyar Nemzet has said, current European security talks already imply recognition of a Russian zone, with the only question being its shape, its size and shape. So arguably controversial statements from inside Hungary. But Hungarian Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó, there on the left, has said his Ukrainian counterpart, so that'd be Andrei Sybiha, will visit Hungary this week. So that's going to be an interesting meeting because, hey, they don't particularly get on. He added that real progress is only possible if the rights taken from Hungarians in Zakarpattia, so this is where they always go. And I talked about this, how it was interesting that Robert Fico from Slovakia said, hey, you guys look after the Slovaks really well in Ukraine. Thank you for that. And yet Hungary say, you guys suck with regard to rights for Hungarians in Zakarpattia, which I don't think is particularly true, but they use that as leverage to try and get concessions in arrangements with the EU and with Ukraine. So real progress is only possible if the rights taken from Hungarians in Zakarpattia are fully restored, stressing the ball is in Ukraine's court. So that is their bone of contention. Whether that is accurately so or not, whether they're justified in that or not, I guess I probably should do a bit more research there. Slovak Prime Minister's ally, so remember Robert Fico, he was quite okay with Ukraine in his talks with them 2 days ago or whenever it was, but they have this issue with regard to the Druzhba oil pipeline, etc., etc. He is in a coalition with the far right, with the one far right party, and I can't remember what the other party is. But the Slovak Prime Minister's ally has compared Ukraine to Hamas and claims that Russia was provoked. Quote, this is the same kind of provoked conflict as when terrorists from Palestine attacked Israel. The war developed in exactly the same way. Absolute BS, of course. Deputy Chairman of Slovakia's ruling Smer party. Actually, no. So that is Robert Fico's own party. A member of the parliament, Tibor Gaspar, said. So his Smer party used to be kind of a populist left party, sort of. But now they're very much nationalist, populist right. They seem to have shifted very much, Robert Fico's party. Now, just throwing some other things in here, like there are mass protests have broken out in Istanbul, that's in Turkey. Clashes between protesters and police have taken place, and it's arisen due to the dissatisfaction among supporters of the opposition party with the policies of Erdogan. Remember, Erdogan imprisoned the opposition leader. The day before, Istanbul authorities banned rallies and demonstrations in 6 districts, and now, of course, that's what it leads to. So that could be an interesting one because, like I've said to you many times before, Turkey is incredibly important, being at the nexus, at the crossroads of the East and West, North and South, Europe, Africa, Middle East, Asia, Islam, secularism, Christianity, NATO, non-NATO, Russian sphere of influence, and the West. Turkey is massively important. So what happens in Turkey is very, very meaningful. And then finally, I don't have time to go through this because I've got to take my son to football now. But in today's Vatnik Soup, I'll introduce American social media personality, says Pekka Kaliniemi, David Freeman, known as Gunter Eagleman. He's best known for spreading massive amounts of political disinformation on Twitter and sucking up to Trump, Putin, and any other authoritarian leader he can find. I might do a separate one on him, maybe a Vatnik Soup video. But anyway, that's something to look forward to. In the meantime, take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Really appreciate your support. Toodle pips.